Hello and welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, our first guest up today is someone that I'm sure a lot of you know or know of, and that would be Josh Zakim. He is the District 8 Boston City Councilor, and you know what? He's coming up to the near end of his first term. But this is a guy who I thought was around for 2 or 3 terms just by the wealth of work and the body of work that he's put out there. He is really, truly a public servant, and he's out there doing a lot for you and your community. So without any further ado, Josh, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Sheriff. Thanks for having me.
So listen, talk to us about District 8. What makes up District 8?
So we include the neighborhoods of the West End, Beacon Hill, Back Bay, Fenway, Kenmore Square, and Mission Hill in Boston.
And what is that population-wise? How many people do you serve?
Around 75,000.
Okay.
Quite a bit of college students. We've got a lot of the BU and Northeastern students there, as well as some of the smaller colleges, too.
Is there really any West End left, really? I mean, there used to be a big West End when Scully Square and all of that was down there, but then I heard they knocked a lot of that down.
The neighborhood physically certainly looks a lot different than it did 50 years ago, but there's quite a few folks, some who have come back, original West Enders who still live there now in some of the apartment buildings there, but quite a few folks who have come there. They work downtown, they work in the hospitals or the schools, or just other long-term residents have really built a community there. The West End Civic Association, very active group that I work with a lot.
So what are some of the burning issues that you're championing?
Well, I think like anyone in Boston, the people in District 8 are really concerned about affordable housing, workforce, middle-class housing, family housing. The neighborhoods I represent are overwhelmingly some of the most expensive neighborhoods in the country, not just in the city of Boston.
Okay.
And I think as folks are coming here, whether they've lived here a long time, seniors who have spent their lives here and raised families here, find themselves being priced out, young people, professionals who come here to start their career, when it's time to take that next step, they're also being priced out. And I think it's a real challenge when we're having a lot of development. I mean, you look out, you see those cranes everywhere.
Right.
It's really important to me, and I think it needs to be important to the whole city, that while we can that's fine if we want to build some very nice, expensive units. You really got to have some that are there for families and people who aren't making 6 figures a year, most of the people in the city of Boston.
Right. I think I recently read something that spoke to the fact that the Mayor Walsh, is putting some money aside for affordable housing, low-income, moderate-income housing. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I think the Mayor Walsh has been a real champion on this issue for the last year and a half since we both came into office together January 2014. And one of the first things he did, which I applauded and I think is really shown to be a great decision, was putting the city's inclusionary development money, that's the money that developers of high-end apartments and condos pay into a city fund to create affordable units. He transferred that over to the Department of Neighborhood Development, which is the city agency that's really charged with building affordable housing in the city and providing that funding to nonprofits and other developers who are committed to affordable and middle-income housing.
So what's the requirements or the jurisdiction on the utilization of that money? Can either the mayor or others say you can only build in this part of the city, or do they have free reign?
Well, so for any large development in my district, and I think most of our civic associations and neighborhood groups feel the same way, we'd like to have the affordable units built on site as part of the larger project to keep our neighborhoods economically diverse. When that's possible, and more often than not it has been possible, that's a great outcome. Sometimes, for a host of reasons, whether it's architectural, financial, or neighborhood otherwise, that developer will pay the money into the citywide inclusionary development fund. That's then administered through neighborhood development. They put out RFPs and they take in bids for developers, whether it's a community development corporation, a nonprofit, or other developers who are building affordable housing.
Because I mean, there's some beautiful high-rise condominiums downtown, but the price that it costs to buy those things is just astronomical, and so, I often wonder as I'm driving through town, who buys these things and who can afford to live here, and so to hear that the city and the mayor are really dedicated to, committed to creating low, moderate income housing, I think that's a good thing, because I agree with you. Once you lose that kind of diversity, economically or otherwise, you tend to lose the vibrancy of that community and its families, I believe, that really make up communities.
I agree with you 100%. I think something that makes Boston great, or really any great city great is the diversity. It's the people from different racial, ethnic, sociological backgrounds, income levels, jobs, mixing, working together, playing together, living together. And when you have a city, and I think Boston's done a good job of trying to keep that, but in some neighborhoods you're having either very young people, college students, or very wealthy people are the only ones who really can afford it. So I think it's incredibly important that we keep this city as diverse as we can.
Talk to us about the Boston Trust Act.
Sure. That's something that Mayor Walsh was a great partner on. I was happy to work on it with him and ultimately all of my colleagues. It was a ordinance we passed last fall in 2014 that prohibits the Boston Police Department from holding people solely for federal immigration violations. This is a program that the Department of Homeland Security had set up where anyone who was booked for any reason by the Boston Police Department would have their information entered in a federal database. And even if they were going to be released otherwise, the federal government could ask the city of Boston at our expense to hold these people while the feds took their time to come and collect them solely for a civil violation, not for any crimes. And that's something that really was sowing a lot of distrust and concern in our immigrant communities. And what really struck out to me was how many folks who were undocumented or who had undocumented relatives who were afraid to come forward as witnesses to crimes or as victims of crimes, particularly sexual assault and domestic violence, where the perpetrators would sort of use the undocumented status against the victims or witnesses. And like it says, Trust Act, trying to restore trust in our immigrant community so they can come and talk to the police and prevent those violent crimes.
Now, this is a lot different from secure communities.
Sure.
Explain to the audience what secure communities was all about, or is all about.
Sure. So Secure Communities is the name of the federal program that has all police departments entering this information in. Now, while they can require you to enter the information in, so everyone has their fingerprints and identifying information sent to a Homeland Security to check, they can't require the Boston police to hold these people unless there's otherwise a warrant. So if someone's, committing crimes, for sure the Boston Police Department's going to hold them. But I felt, one, there's the trust issues that we're talking about, the fact that victims and witnesses to crimes felt afraid to come forward. But it's also a question of fiscal responsibility. We're talking about the city going through right now our budgeting process for the next fiscal year. We have limited resources and we need to spend that on things that are going to directly benefit the residents and the people in the city of Boston, not carrying out work that I think the federal government needs to be doing themselves. They need to fix the immigration problem in Washington, not sort of outsource those problems, including the financial cost to cities like Boston.
So when you listen to the news and you hear folks, our legislators down in Washington, talk about the immigration issue, it's somewhat difficult to really get a true fix on why the problem is as huge or it's taking as long, let's put it that way, to really come to some sort of solution. What's your thoughts on what they're doing that's really kind of stalling the process and what they could do to make this a reality and move on to the next issue?
Well, I think like almost anything in Washington these days, there just seems to be no willingness to work together, really. I mean, there's so much, people want to make sure you're adhering to the orthodoxy of whatever side you're on. There's no compromise anymore. And I think that's something that, I've benefited greatly from on the Boston City Council with my colleagues, with the mayor, where I think we're generally coming at things with a desire to do good, do the right thing, and make progress. And, the Trust Act's a great example. We spent a lot of time discussing the specifics of it, discussing the language, and ultimately getting to a unanimous vote on the council. But we didn't start there. But people came to it with a willingness to work together, a goal of let's see what we can do to make this city better for everyone. And I think that's so important in government. And I'm not in Washington. I don't know really what day to day is over there, but that's the feeling I think I'm getting, and I think a lot of people across the country are getting, is that there's just not a willingness to work together. It's more, how do I beat the other guy, instead of how can we work together to come to a reasonable compromise.
So if you could wave a magic wand, how would you get these folks, our representatives, to do the work that we sent them down to D.C. to do? I mean, clearly, each person is going to have their thoughts, their opinions, and their way of doing things, but we've actually hired them to do the people's business, and it's just been so stalled and so partisan that we can't seem to get anything done, particularly on major issues. If you could wave that magic wand, how would you remedy that?
Well, I'll preface this by saying I am a Democrat, so I think the blame rests with the Republican Party, and I think some of the more extreme views there. I think historically, and New England Republicans, back when we had a few more of them, definitely had different ideas, but they were always willing to compromise. I think whether you're talking about the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, welfare reform under President Clinton, any of sort of the landmark legislation we talk about that's changed the way, and I think largely for the better, in American society has resulted from compromise.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist, I don't know what the basis for that is, but it really, that is the sense I get as someone in Boston looking at Washington, that, you know, President Obama, I think, has offered to compromise again and again. I think Democrats in the House and the Senate have been willing to come to the table again and again, and they're rebuffed. I mean, you see some of the rhetoric that's coming out of not just the presidential candidates, Republican presidential candidates in the Senate, but others can just say, you know, I remember, I believe it was the first term, President Obama's first term, one of the leaders of the Republicans in the Senate said, my goal is to make him fail. Not my goal is to make the country better, but my goal is to make the president fail. And when you start off with that position, it really is impossible to get things done. Yeah. So I think we have the best system in the world, but you need to have people who are down there who want to make it work, and you need to have their voters hold them accountable when they're not.
So one of the things that the big snowstorm that we had this past winter highlighted is just how difficult our transportation system is working effectively, and then as a larger issue, our entire infrastructure. When we talk about roads and bridges and so on and so forth. Talk to me about, and I know it's probably not in your portfolio, but the infrastructure situation and what we need to do to really get our arms around both the MBTA and our roads and bridges.
It's investment. I think it's, you know, the solution to every problem isn't more money, but when your roads and bridges and trains are crumbling, when we had train cars on the T that were there in the blizzard of 78 here, you know, this last fall, that's very easily to see where the money goes and how it's going to improve. And I think that's a result of, you know, folks sort of kicking the can down the road here in Massachusetts, but also at the federal level, where the money that used to go to repairing roads and bridges, trains, transit infrastructure, Amtrak, just isn't there as much anymore. And we're talking about something, you know, I think some of the what conservative members in Congress and others say, you know, this has to be more efficient, need to make a profit. My response to that is, the trains, our subways, our roads are a public good. They're a public utility. If we don't have functioning train system, a subway system in Boston, we're not going to be able to generate that private growth, the private economic growth, the capital markets, all the infrastructure, or rather, all the business that's done in Boston or New York City or Philadelphia or any major city that relies on mass transit to get people to and from work.
Talk to the folks at home that are watching, and explain to them exactly what the city council does. What is I believe there's 13 city councilors. How many district, how many at large, and what is the functionality? You know, I've heard that it's kind of the boots on the ground, that first interaction between the communities and government. But talk to us about that.
Sure. Well, there are 13 members. We have nine district councilors, myself and 8 others, and 4 who are elected at large, representing the whole city. And it's been like that since 1983, the current system. And we're the legislature for the city. Passing laws. Right now we're reviewing the city's budget for fiscal 2016. It's almost $3 billion. That includes the school budget of just over $1 billion, police, fire, you know, public works, you know, your essential city services. And day to day, it means being available. It means going to my civic association meetings, going out in the neighborhoods. I hold office hours every Friday morning from 8 to 9:30 a.m. at a different neighborhood in the district. I'm everywhere once a month. To make sure that when folks have a concern, whether it's about a street lamp or a pothole or about the Olympics or about, you know, a huge development coming into their neighborhood, that they have someone to interact to who's accountable to them and who knows the terrain. I think that's one of the things I like best about this role is that when people are coming to their city government, and I think to some extent, you know, to their state reps and senators as well, a lot of the problems that they're bringing to us are small enough that we can make a difference, that we can fix it. You know, we're talking about some of the bigger issues here of affordable housing, transportation, immigration. Those are all things we tackle and deal with every day, but those are much more long-term problems, as anyone can tell. But being able to fix someone's problem, being able to say to, you know, a senior citizen's landlord, you need to fix this elevator so Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith can get up to their 5th floor apartment when they're using a cane or a walker, because that's your obligation as a responsible landlord in the city of Boston. That gives me, I think, really, I feel very gratified when I'm able to do that, when we're able to help people with those small but incredibly important issues in their day-to-day lives. And I think goes a long way to restoring people's faith in their government if we're able to help them with those problems.
So now you're coming, as I mentioned earlier, you're nearing the end of your first term. Talk to us about campaigning and being out there, day in, day out, going to community meetings, knocking on doors, talking to folks about the things that you would like to effectuate if, in fact, they gave you their vote and sent you to City Hall, which they did. Talk to us about the process.
So when I first ran for re-election in 2013, there were 9 people running to fill the seat that Mike Ross held the seat for almost 15 years before he left to run for mayor in 2013. So we knocked on doors, like you said. We had a phone bank.
There were 9 of you.
There were 9 initially, so a lot of folks in there. Knocked on the doors, phone banked. Still, like I said, I think every day, civic association events, community meetings. It's really about getting out there. One of the benefits, and I think it's a benefit of district city council as opposed to the at-large or governor or mayor or even sheriff, is that the districts are small enough where I feel like I do know most of the folks, or at least they're by name, or they've called, or we've emailed each other, who are voting in this race. So it's about being accessible, and people will hold you accountable. Absolutely.
And people really do care about their communities, don't they?
Absolutely.
And they will let you know that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My cell phone was on all of our campaign literature, which is still being used a few years later. So people know how to reach me, whether it's on email, on Twitter. They send me Facebook messages. And that's what it's all about. I think we really take it very seriously, the responsibility to be accessible and responsive to constituents' concerns.
Now, you're also a lawyer. Did you plan on going into public service, or did this just kind of happen once Michael decided that he was going to step away and run for mayor?
Well, public service, as opposed to elective office, was definitely something I was always interested in. As it worked out, I was at Greater Boston Legal Services for my first year practicing, doing foreclosure prevention and home loan modifications for low-income families in the Boston area. After that, I was at the law firm Mintz Levin doing municipal finance. It's when the MBTA or the state or colleges and universities were borrowing money on the open market. And after a couple years there, my feeling was I wanted to be a little more in the community, so to speak, and doing more than just, on the weekends or on the evenings volunteering. So when it happened around the same time that Mike Ross was leaving to run for mayor, a lot of friends in the neighborhood around the city said, this would probably be a good fit. Have you thought about this? And I looked at it, talked to Mike, talked to a lot of supporters in the neighborhood, and universally was encouraged to do it. I'm grateful for all those folks who gave their advice and support in the beginning, and we got out there and we knocked those doors, we marched in the parades.
And there's a lot of them too.
There can be. Looking forward to them this summer as well, and I'm hopeful that this November the voters will have me back for a second term.
Well, listen, I haven't heard anything untowards about you or what you're doing, so I'd be surprised if they didn't. I mean, you've rolled up your sleeves, you've gotten out there. I see you at a lot of events, so I mean, you're definitely representing the people that have sent you to office, and making sure that they hold you accountable and that you, in turn, provide the services and the advice and the counsel that they need, which is a great thing. But for any folks out in the audience that may be thinking about running for office in the future, how would you advise them? How would you tell them to prepare themselves before they actually jumped into a campaign?
I think you have to really think about why, what you want to do here, and it's not the political answer. It's hard work, as you know. It's a lot of work, and I'm getting a lot of satisfaction, I think, of moving the ball forward. Sometimes in a big way on some of these issues, and sometimes incrementally, and working with my neighbors really around the city to do that. And you also got to think about getting involved and making sure that you're active in your neighborhood. You can't just plop down and say, this looks like something I'm interested in. I mean, it really is. It's the backbone of the support that I had in my first election was folks from my ward committee, the Ward 5 Democratic Committee. That's mostly Beacon Hill, Back Bay, and Bay Village, and folks in civic associations and other neighborhood associations that I'd worked with, nonprofit groups across the city that really, I think, respected the work I'd done in the past and believed in what we were talking about of a city that was inclusive, providing economic opportunity and social justice really across the board. And I think that's been certainly the theme of the campaign, but I think more importantly, been the theme of the first year in office, from the Trust Act to we had an investigation of sort of a bad landlord in the Fenway and Mission Hill areas. Issued the first subpoenas in quite a few decades on the city council to have that landlord come and explain himself about why he was treating his tenants so poorly.
He'll probably never rent you an apartment.
Nope. And I thought maybe we were going to have to call you to enforce that subpoena. But luckily we didn't have to. But it is. I mean, that's really, I think, been the theme of what we've been trying to do is say, we have an opportunity here in the city of Boston. Things are doing so well. There's a lot of growth, a lot of good things, but I want to make sure that people in all of our neighborhoods and across the board are able to participate in this innovation economy, this growing economy, because that's not always the case.
So we've got 2 minutes left. Just let me ask you two quick questions. One, I found it amazing, frankly, that as we were running our campaign, that so many people actually kind of our message resonated with them, and they got behind us and really worked tirelessly, frankly, for no money, actually. Talk to me about that. How did you feel about the fact that you were able to work with your neighbors and your friends and colleagues, and they were all kind of there for you to help you get to office?
Well, I think you certainly find out who your friends are when you need someone to come and knock on doors 12 hours when it's 85 degrees out in the summer.
True,
but it was obviously encouraging, gave me a lot of, made me really feel like we had support when people were out there working with us, but also it was a lot of pressure. You don't want to let folks down, and I think that's something that we've tried to continue carrying through this first term. Hopefully in the second term is to make sure that, we told folks what we want to do, why we're running for office. They came together to work with us to make this happen and want to make sure live up to those expectations and continue to move the ball forward on all those important issues of justice and equality.
And as we close out here, just tell folks if they want to get in touch with you and they want to get some information from you, how do they do that?
Sure. JoshZakim.com, best way to reach me on the website. I'm on Twitter, Josh Zakim. Facebook, you can email me, josh@joshzakim.com, or just Google. As far as I know, I'm the only Josh Zakim that's out there in the internet.
I think you got that, brother. Hey, well, look, thanks for coming through. We really appreciate it. And, we're going to follow you, and hopefully we can have you back sometime soon just to talk about how things are going for you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Okay, folks, so we're about to go to a break, and on the other side, we've got State Representative Russell Holmes here, and he's going to talk to you about a whole bunch of great things that he's doing, including working with us at the Sheriff's Department. He actually teaches financial literacy to the inmate population, so please do stay tuned.